Number 10. Rice as detergent. As it was always said once before, rice is life, and during the Qin and Han dynasties, people formed the habit to wash their hair every 3 days and to bathe every 5. For this reason, the government then declared to take off 1 day off in every 5, and what they used was rice, or rice water if you don't eat rice. When you wash your rice, you are left with rice water, which is what you typically pour out of, and rewash your rice. And you do this until your rice is clear, but in some cases like in ancient China, they would use the murky rice water as detergent. And it wasn't dirty, by the way. It was just the starch coming off of the rice. In the pre-Qin days, people first washed their hair and bathed with rice water, which as I mentioned contains starch, proteins, and vitamins. Not only did it help remove oil stains and maintain the scalp and hair, but it also helped with rough skin. There was also medicinal functions associated with rice water, as it helped with cold hands and feet, low back pain, and frostbite, as well as fatigue and relief. Such natural cosmetics were in effect a combination of shampoo, shower gel, and facial cleansers. Then there was the Chinese honey locust with its many uses. During the Southern Qi dynasty, it could effectively clean the skin and eliminate dirt, as well as being a kind of ancient moisturizer. For laundry, it could stop clothes from fading and deforming, and for bathing, it could help treat rheumatism and ringworm. Even in some parts in modern China today, still uses rice as a hair wash, and my god, their hair is so long and shiny. I need that, for sure. Number 9. Salt and vinegar toothpaste. When it comes to hygienics, your teeth should definitely be included. In some places like ancient Rome, they used urine to brush their teeth. Some parts of the Victorian era used salt, and for ancient China, it was salt, but hold the P. It was vinegar instead. Just like Little Miss Vicky's chips, the ancient Chinese civilization, or at least part of the Wei and Jin, Su, and Tang, would dip their fingers in salt, tea, wine, vinegar, basically the latter, to wipe their teeth and rinse their mouth. Written by a famous ancient Chinese doctor, Essential Recipes for Emergent Use Worth 1,000 Gold, mentioned getting up every morning and putting salt on your mouth, hold it for a bit, and rinse with warm water. As it was noted, to make your teeth firm, later the ancient Chinese no longer used salt to clean their teeth because they had by then discovered an exclusive recipe, tooth powder. Number 8. Horsehair. A very common thing in ancient times is to figure out what is the most basic way to self-care, and when you figure out you gotta use salt and vinegar as a toothpaste mix, normally one would use their fingers as an application. But in ancient China, they figured to migrate from using their hands to using willow branches at first. The method is to first take a small swath of willow branches and rinse it clean, then one end is chewed until the branch fibers are exposed and the end becomes hairy. In this way, a simple toothbrush is achieved, and after that the toothbrush was dipped in a little of that magic tooth powder. Brushing teeth complete, very simple, and in low in cost. Later toothbrush was upgraded, with the wise Chinese using animal bristles to make toothbrushes that were very similar to those of today, most of which employing pig bristles. Although the texture was a bit hard, it was cheap. But for the rich, they would use horse bristles because they were apparently softer and more comfortable for brushing the teeth. Even the Southern Song dynasty, there was a shop dedicated and specializing in production and sale of toothbrushes. They became more common and were made of wood and bamboo, very similar to today's upgraded invention, and they would have 2 rows of holes where they punch a horse bristle and have it attached. Number 7. Threading. When it comes to shaving or plucking one's hair, you'd have to take the conventional means of using a razor, a tweezer, or sometimes wax. Ancient Chinese, however, didn't have a culture where it was typical to custom to shave one's hair unless it was facial hair. The concept of threading is very popularized around this time and is actually still very common practice today. You can find a specific threading store in your area too. The practice is to remove delicate facial hair to make the face look smoother, as both women and men would use this treatment typically to look good before a wedding. Basically, you'd first start the application with lime powder to the face, then a wet cotton thread is then twisted up, down, left, and right around the hairs to be removed, hence threading. They'd use this method using their teeth and their hands. As I mentioned, it's still used today by many different cultures as well, and it's a still popular method used by elderly people in China today. Number 6. Toilet papier. The invention of the toilet has been used as a way to ensure human waste was distributed away from the rest of the town so that the sustainability of health and wellness of everyone else was separate. But the concept of toilet paper was made in ancient China after people were getting sick of using leaves and branches and even rocks. After the Han dynasty, there was a special tool called chugi, made by cutting bamboo slices into stripes. The shape was thin, flat, and slightly wide around its edges. The better models had greater water absorption and a light fragrance. The upper classes would also wash themselves afterwards with water and then even use aromatherapy. It took a very long time for the chugi to give away its paper due to the latter's of high cost. It was not until the Yuan dynasty and then the only emperor generally used straw paper. And the Ming Qi dynasty, straw paper was often used by common people, with royalty opting instead for silk.
Number 5. Big polluter. This just doesn't make any sense. It never did to me, and it still doesn't. But in case you didn't know, self-pleasure was a big no-no, commonly called self-pollution, which honestly is very funny to me. That's just hilarious. Don't self-pollute yourself, Chris. That's bad. Don't do that. That's naughty. It was a sin and thought to be a cause for many ailments. I'm sure you've heard the classic saying that for guys, if you decided to go bump in the night by yourself, there's a good chance you'd need a walking stick because it would make you go blind. Women were also targeted, however, as for any pearl polishing by women was thought to be hysteric and needed to be treated for such. Look, the truth is, any man who wants to wax his carrot or woman tuning a one-dial radio should be able to do so without judgment of society or medical remedies of snake oil doctors. Love yourself, love everybody else, and just as long as the bedroom door's closed, you're good. Just don't do it in public, you're good. Number 4, shake and bake. I'm something of a scientist myself, but that doesn't mean I know everything, and if you actually need to learn something about health and safety, take it from a professional, not a second-rate John Candy. However, when coming across this fact, I just had to share it, because with my medical knowledge, this just doesn't sound right. Alright, so kids, we know how they're made. I don't need to go into detail for that. However, there was this idea back in the Victorian days that if a woman danced shortly after doing what mommy and daddies do, then there was a chance that her pregnancy just wouldn't happen. Or perhaps more commonly after riding a horse. Same idea. Okay. Which is frankly horse. I mean, come on. My mom always told me when she was baking that I had to be quiet and stop running around the house or the cake she was baking wouldn't rise. Well, they always did. I love chocolate cake. I mean, really, I do. I'm starting to wonder if there's a connection here. I was a rowdy kid. Number 3, the Kensington system. Poor Queen Victoria. I know this is kind of a stretch, but it relates back to the whole mistreating women thing. But basically, it was something implemented in order to control the young royal, make her dependent on her mother, whom she was not allowed to be without. Basically, modern day strict parents. Now, all the kids watching right now, or all the kids who've grown up, how well did that parenting work? Let us know in the comments. I'm willing to bet it created a little bit of a divide between parent and child. Am I right? That's exactly what happened with Queen Victoria. Shouldn't be surprised, really. Being a parent is tough. I get that. But squeeze too hard and the sand falls through the cracks of your hand. Victoria wasn't even allowed an hour to herself. And I don't care who you are, no matter how charismatic or bubbly. Everybody needs some alone time. Number 2, a healthy breakfast. Okay, not Victorian London, but this is just too funny not to mention, and it's around the same time period, very close. As the great minds of the time thought, self-pollution was a big no-no, and the reason for these urges was often related to food. Some thought eating meat would make you down bad, so a man named John Harvey Kellogg, you might have heard of him, aimed to cure the sickness of self-love. What if a man had a delicious, nutritious meal to eat, especially at the start of his day? Cornflakes by Kellogg's, the very same cereal that's probably sitting on top of your fridge, yeah, was partially originally designed to stop you from feeling those carnal urges. Now, not sure if that works. I mean, go ahead and tell me how you feel after eating a bowl of that. I had one this morning. I feel fine. I don't feel any different at all. I mean, I'm just, well, not really feeling the same about Pam Anderson anymore though. Number 1, rising action. This could get some married couples into some trouble if they're watching, so sorry. It's gonna be hard to talk about this without saying it because YouTube will send a stern letter if I do, but here it goes. The deed was not considered done unless both parties had signed off on it, had their toes curled, reaching the peak, your magnum opus, the way I feel when I eat at McDonald's, DEFCON 1, or simply mispronouncing organisms in health class. I feel like once you're involved, you're involved. And to me, that's a done deal. You can't really reverse it from that point on, regardless of any of my euphemisms, but that's what they thought. They thought if you both didn't climb that mountain together, it didn't happen. 'Cause science.
At number 10, veil. Through this video, you will come to find out that a lot of the wedding traditions that we practice these days have some pretty messed up origins. We'll get through a lot of them throughout this list, but let's start off by talking about the bride's veil. These days, a lot of brides choose to wear a veil on their wedding day. With so many different styles to choose from, this accessory is known to add that extra little pizzazz, little spice to the look. But throughout history, veils were used for different things, some of them being a tad bit messed up. just a smidge. The rather obvious reason for brides to wear a veil back in the day had to do with religion and staying modest. But this hasn't been the only reason for veils. In ancient Rome, brides wore veils because it was believed to be effective at warding off evil spirits. The most messed up reason for the veil though, at least in my opinion anyway, has to do with the wedding transaction, so to speak. Since back in the olden days, marrying your daughter off was seen as more of a transaction, brides would wear veils to cover their faces and they wouldn't be lifted until after they were proclaimed husband and wife, so that the groom wouldn't be able to back out if he didn't like how his bride looked. Seems pretty messed up to me, but what are your thoughts on it? Tell us down in the comments.
Number 9. When doves cry. I've been to one wedding where they released doves, like actual real life doves, and I was like, do they actually do this? I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't know it was a real thing. Why do we do this? Well, because doves mate for life, and they build a nest, and then they Netflix and chill until the end of their dove days. Sounds like perfect symbolism if I've ever heard it. Back in ancient Roman and Greek times, doves were often used as gifts from the bride to the groom. Pretty shitty gift if you ask me. Here's a bird that we now have to both take care of. The snow white ring-necked dove is used by magicians. They can't fly too well, they don't have a homing instinct, whereas rock doves, the ones commonly used in weddings that we see fly away over Nana's head, they have a homing instinct for hundreds of miles, so they're perfect for the gig. But they couldn't be released during foul weather, and they needed 2 hours before the sun sets in order for them to fly home. The wedding band has less rules than the doves. That's amazing. Their rider is much smaller. If you were to catch one of these doves at a wedding, you were also allowed to keep it back in the day. Also, great hands. I don't know who's catching birds or why they want to keep it and put it in their pocket, but you do you.
At number 8, best man. These days, the role of the best man normally goes to the guy who's closest to the groom, whether that's a brother or a best friend. But back during the time where women were married off like property, the role of the best man was very different and was all about protecting one's assets. Back then, bride napping was actually very common, so if there was someone else who wanted to marry someone who was already promised to another person, they might try and steal her away for themselves. Yeah, why? I don't know. This is where the best man came in. The best man's job was to protect the bride, and if she was stolen, the best man would be the one to enter whatever battle or duel was necessary to get the bride back. The best man was literally there to be the best fighter. The best man was also there to watch over the bride to make sure that she didn't try and make a run for it herself. They really said, try to derail this wedding and see what happens.
Number 7. A June wedding. As we're counting down this list slowly but surely, you've probably begun fantasizing maybe about your own wedding one day. Maybe it's a beach wedding, maybe it's themed like a winter wonderland. Doesn't that sound cozy? It's your big day, get creative. They say the best month to get married is June, and from a Canadian point of view, I can absolutely agree with that. In ancient Roman times, however, getting married in June was a must, not just a thing you wanted to do. See, June was the month of the god Juno. They protect women in life when it comes to marriage and childbirth, so if it's between that and like, I don't know, Halloween, obviously we're gonna go with June. Better omens for sure. Another myth is that bathing was rarely done back then, so when majority of the population did finally, wash up at the end of May or beginning of June, that's often when it would happen. Everybody smelled nice, they felt good, and they wanted to celebrate. So it was perfect timing. Better get me while my pits smell good, you know? That's a myth, but I can also see it checking out. A June wedding in ancient Roman days was also done so that after a spring birth, the mother can quickly hop back into action and help with that summer's harvest. Maternity leave who? Never heard of her.
At number 6, hashtag twinning. You know how at weddings the bridesmaids are usually wearing matching outfits? Well, this tradition dates back centuries, though it has changed slightly over the years. Remember how I mentioned that people would sometimes try to kidnap the bride on her wedding day? Well, other than the best man and the groomsmen trying to play their part in protecting the bride from being taken, the bridesmaids also played a part in that too. The bridesmaids used to dress identically to the bride so that it would make it harder to spot her and therefore prevent anyone from kidnapping her. This practice dates all the way back to ancient Rome and feudal China and didn't really start to fade out of tradition until around the 1880s. These days you get a couple of gifts from the bride for being in her posse, but back then you didn't get anything and you had to risk your safety for your girl Becky, who doesn't even want to marry Jeff down the block. I don't know.
Number 5. Emo girl. All the Forever Alone people, raise your hand. Let me hear you roar XD. I like to joke around a lot and say I'm a lawyer, a firefighter, and the cutest guy on the whole wide internet. But if there's one thing I know, it's people. I like people. I love them. I spend a lot of time with them, and after hearing this, I've come to the conclusion that this is where the emo girls come from. I figured it all out. It's down to a science. I'm a scientist now. Do you ever get that feeling in your tummy on Valentine's Day because you know it's going to be another one alone? And you'll be forced to be on your own, and that means sad music and crying in your room. Same, it's Drake's Marvin room for me. Well, single women in Victorian times had similar issues. Since women were expected to marry and have kids, single women who were also forever alone were pitied by society, which I argue is just way worse. No one wants to be pitied. Ugh. Number 4, gold diggers. She take my money when I'm in need. As she travel. Okay, anyway, back to the actual content. Well, not exactly. While today in a place like sunny California, you might see an older man with a woman who's half his age. Maybe he's driving a nice car, or she's got on the very best and latest from Louis Vuitton. Stylish, yeah. Most of us think some thoughts about what we might think is going on there. We can kind of be judgmental sometimes when we see things like that. However, looking through a lens of 2022 to Victorian times might make the women of Victorian times appear to be gold diggers, but in reality, it was because all of their financials were tied to their husbands, legally too. Which, if you can imagine, that system didn't work too well. What if your husband is broke? What if your husband is running amok with sultry lasses on the street corners? Like I said before, no divorce, but even if she could leave him easily, supporting herself afterwards was going to be an issue, especially financially. Number 3, birth factory. Just pump them out. The faster the better. Quantity over quality. Just get them out. The use of birth control, as you can tell, was not a common practice. Anyone who's over the age of 25, ask your grandparents how many brothers and sisters they have. I'm willing to bet it's in the 6 to 8 range. Let me know in the comments below, I'm curious. A trend that would continue for a few decades after. Education is important, and I'll get to that in my next part. Women were simply expected to act this way. Maybe it was the sign of the times since the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Maybe the factories needed workers, I don't know. Which, in case you didn't know, they used children as employees. Maybe not so nice. Unfortunately, that was when there was an issue, and there were many. They had no HR to go to, and that was the least of their worries, really. Number 2, no school for you. No higher education for women. Banned from going to university. I don't think so, not very nice, no. Honestly, any society that doesn't want half of their population to go to school probably has a few things to work out. It's a boys' club, and they can only go to university so that they can learn to be smarter and be businessmen, so they can earn money and thus have the facilities to court a woman who really doesn't have a choice anyway. Women had jobs, not careers. And they were all the jobs that you can think of. The ones that were too feminine for men, as women were too feeble to participate in a men's job, which is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm happy to say that in 2022, we showed them wrong. Chetty loves everyone. Just remember that, I love everybody. You go, girls. Number 1, strict rules. Okay, so after a night in the bed sheets with the gal that you love, or maybe the one that you found, there's a good chance that 9 months later, a smaller version of you two could be walking around. A byproduct of intimacy, if you will. This was always something I wanted to rant about, but I always found it strange how strict parents and teachers from this time were with their kids. You gotta brush your hair, bed made, and whatever you do, don't ask for more gruel. Please, sir, could I have some more? Whatever that Charles Dickens book was, I think it was Oliver Twist. They made us read those books as kids, and I don't know why, because they're kind of boring. From the extreme military code ethics happening at home to the long days in a factory at work, being a kid was tough, man. Earning the punk rock blues of today. I'm just a kid and my life is a nightmare.
At number 10, watching Consummation. Back in medieval times, depending on the century, weddings either meant a lot or meant nothing at all. If it was the early medieval age, then no one really gave a hoot about marriage, and I'll get to that later. But later, in the medieval age, marriage became a holy sacrament, and this sacrament had to be consummated. On the night of the couple's wedding, they would do the good old brown chicken, brown cow, boom boom pow, OMG wow, which could have been a positive or negative experience depending on circumstance, but it was also a little weird because there would be people watching it all happen. That's That's right guys, after the ceremony and reception, people would follow the bride and groom up to the bedroom and be like, hey Joe, grab the popcorn, we're watching the live showing of 50 Shades of Grey. And Joe would be like, yo bet, and then that's exactly how it happened. Anyways, this was all done so that there were witnesses to the consummation, so that the marriage's validity could be backed up. So if anyone tried to deny that their marriage was legit, Joe with the popcorn would be able to back up the bride and groom and confirm that everything happened. Kinda kinky, kinda weird.
Number 9, dowries. Today's weddings are so insanely expensive. I don't know if it's ever gonna happen for me, for that reason alone. But, you know, they kind of replaced the dowry altogether. But what was a dowry? It was a set of assets, money, material, goods, real estate that would be given to the groom once the couple united. The purpose of the dowry was to entice a groom to marry the bride if he wasn't already attracted to her. A kind of, we will pay you to marry our daughter kind of vibes. But it also acts as a kind of insurance for the bride. Should the marriage end in divorce, the husband is expected to pay it back. So yes, there were indeed take-backsies if things got really bad. Though considering divorce and annulments were rare and the money really never belonged to her, not the best rule to live by, but the groom would also pay something called the bride price or bride wealth. The groom was expected to pay a sum either in assets or money to secure a lady's hand in marriage. This implied security for the bride and their family. But yes, in both accounts, technically, a bride could be bought and sold for whatever price the family/groom deemed appropriate, so really just a marriage pawn.
On number 8, shotgun wedding. Marriage and weddings back in the medieval ages were practiced very differently compared to today. Back then, people started getting married and having kids very, very young. Usually, girls would be married off as soon as they hit puberty, so around the age of 12, and they would start popping out as many spawn as possible because the high infant mortality rate made it very difficult to grow a family. On top of the duty to further the population, these marriages weren't for love. Arranged marriages were the norm back then because it was mostly used to join families for status or alliances, or because your dad owed Billy from down the block a favor and he offered you to his son Billy Jr. Marriage ceremonies were also very different back then. Because marriage wasn't as big of a fuss as it is now, it didn't matter where you got married or how soon. You could get engaged in the morning and be married by lunchtime if you really wanted to. Most people didn't need permission to get married, so they could hold the ceremony anywhere. Marriage ceremonies could be held in places like pubs, in the middle of the street, or even in bed. Because of this, it made it really hard to know who was married and to whom until the 12th century, when it was declared a holy sacrament that must be observed by God.
Number 7, no objections. So obviously, with a lot of people marrying willy-nilly, a lot of marriages mostly made people miserable. Maybe. Enemies to lovers is my favorite book trope, so who knows how spicy things actually got. I hate you, I love you, next day, I don't know. But the famous line, speak now or forever hold your peace, only got introduced in 1215 to try and flesh out drama before they couldn't go back. In the Middle Ages, drama, discovered after marriage vows were exchanged, caused major problems since divorce wasn't easy or, you know, accepted. We will get to that later. For instance, Joan of Kent, who was known for marrying Edward the Black Prince and mothering Richard II, had a secret marriage when she was 12 years old. She didn't get approved. In her early teens, she was married to an aristocrat, but the secret marriage was discovered after 8 years. The papal court had to overturn it and return her to her knight. He died 11 years later, and it was after that her cousin Edward married her. Wouldn't it have been nice to know that little detail before she married the aristocrat guy? Yeah, probably would have saved a lot of heartbreak. Hence why the speak now or forever hold your peace was introduced.
At number 6, shoes! Back in the days of old, shoes were apparently a huge staple in society. They were pointy and weird and expensive and complicated and were even integrated into marriage practices. During the wedding ceremony, it was a tradition for the father of the bride to take one of the bride's shoes and give it to the groom. The groom would then tap the bride on the head with the shoe in a token of his authority. But the shoe traditions don't stop at bopping people on the head like little bunny foo-foo. You know how these days there's a tradition of throwing the bouquet at weddings, and apparently whoever catches it is the next to get married? Well, that tradition sort of came from the medieval tradition of throwing shoes at weddings. Instead of throwing flowers, brides would throw shoes at their bridesmaids to determine who was next to walk down the aisle. Now this whole bride throwing things idea has failed me before because I caught a bouquet once and I'm as single as ever, so maybe someone needs to chuck a shoe at me or something this time. please.
Number 5. Jolly Lad. When people think about certain magazines that depict lewd imagery, you probably only think of Playboy. The bunny imagery was good marketing, honestly, just smart. But what if I told you the Hefmeister wasn't the first to publish such a magazine, or imagery? Back in the Victorian era, there was some saucy imagery being produced. The government had outlawed such indecency, but this only made the lewd picture industry move underground, where naturally it flourished, especially in major cities. And if you knew where to go and how to ask for one, you could purchase something from the hidden menu. Kind of like when you go to McDonald's. Yeah, there's a hidden menu there too. Google it and see for yourself. I'd repeat what my favorite one is, but I would be in trouble from the YouTube gods. And I've been treading on thin ice this whole video, so Number 4, the first counterculture. The 1960s were a very important time for many different people. Black Americans were fighting for their rights, music went from holding hands to strawberry fields, if you know what I'm saying, and everything that your parents told you just kind of felt wrong. If you grew up then, you know what I mean. I know people like to make fun of hippies, but there was some good ideas there. Well, in 1890s England, they were sort of having the same thing happen. Obviously not as strong as a push as it was in the 60s, but still. Basically, after all the oppression towards bedroom relations, people began to open up. Not literally, just open up thinking wise. That's really gross, don't repeat that. There's only one way we all got here. Unless you're a test tube baby, of course. In that case, thank you for watching CT133576-2. To some historians, this makes sense. When you push and push for things to happen or ban, eventually people will push back, especially if it's something like bedroom time. Everybody likes a little bit of bedroom time. Valentine's Day wasn't too long ago. Remember that? It was good. It was fun. It was good fun. Number 3, Jack the Ripper. While the man's numbers don't compare to any of the other horrible people in history, he's unusual because of his brutality and the fact that he was never caught. Jack the Ripper was maybe the first modern serial unaliver. He haunted the streets of Victorian London and is responsible for claiming multiple women's lives, women of the evening to be exact, and they began to know the name Jack the Ripper. Now, we'll probably just have to show you pictures of Victorian London or maybe some B-roll of a shadowy figure because there ain't no way we can show the crime scenes. There's probably a dozen different theories on who done it. Some say it was multiple men using his name as an alias, some say it was Prince Albert, there's even some who suggest that he was a she, and which explains why women were so easy to go off with Jack. That actually kind of makes sense to me at least, and why no one really would be looking for a woman back then. Kind of makes sense. Anyway, be careful out there, ladies. Just be careful. Number 2, Queen Victoria. It seems old Blighty herself may have been a tad more promiscuous than you'd think a royal to be. Well, not with other men, but her husband, who in her diary claims to be the love of her life, which honestly is kind of sweet and romantic. That's nice. One thing that I find interesting, however, is that while lewd images were outlawed, the Queen may have commissioned a painting of herself that was quite risque for the time, to gift to her husband, of course. Hypocrisy much? I say lewd, but it was probably just in her loose-fitting clothes, with maybe like an ankle showing or something. Still, unusual behavior for the Queen. I'll remember that for next time, Blight. I'll remember that. Number 1, Prince Albert. If you've ever stepped foot into a tattoo parlor, then you might know where I'm going with this. Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, had some controversy circulating his name. One, because he shares a name with another Prince Albert, who was speculated to be Jack the Ripper, but also because of a very unique piercing. Go ahead and take a guess where that piercing is. Yeah, I didn't think so. As a man, if your anatomy could be described by an internet comedian using moderately funny euphemisms, then the piercing would go through your German army helmet. That makes sense, right? The horror. The absolute horror. It's rumored that he had one of these piercings. Did he? I'm not sure. But if it means anything to you, Nicholas II had a tattoo, so it's not completely out of the realm of possibility.
Number 10, oral care. When it comes to overall healthcare, your teeth should also be in that list. And for the Victorians, typically they'd only really go to the dentist when the damage is near its breaking point. And because they didn't have any toothpaste that wasn't drenched in the multitude of poisons they thrived off on, people would brush their teeth using salt, typically putting salt on their fingers and then rubbing across their teeth. The toothbrush as we know today was invented in 1857, however, it wasn't until the nylon bristle toothbrushes of the 1930s came along that brushing one's teeth became more widespread. Salt is a natural disinfectant that helps with gum disease in a few ways. It removes loose debris and cleans the teeth and gums, but reduces inflammation and swelling and soothes the gums. It also gets rid of decay and plaque. Gum recessions can be caused by eating too much salt, and gums as part of the immune system may pull back to reveal a cementum of teeth, making them more vulnerable and less resistant to tooth decay. So while it may look effective, it's actually temporarily removing surface stains. As for salt, the same holds true. Salt acts as a surface abrasive and can definitely make the teeth look whiter, but it can definitely damage your tooth enamel. And unfortunately, once your teeth is damaged, it's damaged damaged for life. And it wasn't until the 1940s that the concept of brushing one's teeth would be considered a routine event. Number 9, bad bathrooms. The bathroom as we know it is a Victorian invention, but at first it could be a dangerous place. Besides horrible cases of scalding in the bathtub, there was even reports that there were incidents of lavatories spontaneously exploding. The reason this might be was due to the fact that flammable gases such as methane and hydrogen sulfide emanating from human waste built up in the sewers, and then early toilets would leak back into the homes where they would theoretically be ignited by a naked flame of a candle. Wild stuff, but that did happen. And since showers were not invented yet, everyone did bathe to keep clean. Most people bathed in rather small quantities of water in their bedrooms with a basin and pitcher of cold water. Poorer families would have to boil water on the stove and then add it to the cold water to a wooden or metal tub, usually in the kitchen area where it was time for a deep scrub down. Hands, face, and armpits and crotch were essentially regions that was not necessarily to be submerged in order to maintain cleanliness. Nicer homes not only had proper porcelain bathtubs, both hot and cold taps nearby, even some had the luxury of a luxurious foot bath, but these extravagant things were more for your feet. Number 8, flammable park ensign. Although it's a great invention as it helped many advance many parts of our modern civilizations of immense proportions, it still aggressively fills out our landfills and destroys thousands of ecosystems. But still, it's a very useful material, but of course not everything about it at first was beneficial to its beholder. A British inventor named Alexander Parkes, who invented the moldable material and was considered the first celluloid of a bulk material for forming objects as we call today, plastic. He christened it as Parkenstein, but it quickly became known as its American name of celluloid. The development of celluloid was particularly spurred by the desire to reduce reliance on ivory with its shortage caused by overhunting, and the inventor Alexander was never able to see his invention reach to full fruition after his firm went bankrupt due to scale up costs. Such early plastics were highly desirable because they allowed everything from brooches to hair combs to billiard balls, previously only available in expensive ivory, to be made cheaply. It was even used to make collars and cuffs that could be easily cleaned. Unfortunately, Parkenstein is also very flammable as it degrades and can self-ignite and is explosive on impact. Weird. Number 7, boracic acid in milk. No one should cry over spilt milk unless it's been treated by boracic acid, and in that case you should be 100% allowed to cry and your experiences are valid. In the 1800s, boracic acid was believed to purify milk, removing the sour taste and smell from milk that had gone off. In a casual remark in her widely popular 1861 book, Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management mentioned one should use boracic acid in their milk. She told consumers that this was quite harmless in an addition, but she was wrong. Boracic acid purifying milk was responsible for getting a lot of people sick. Small amounts of boracic acid could cause nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea, but worse, it was what boracic acid concealed that was particularly dangerous, and before pasteurization, milk was often contained a huge amount of bovine TB, or, beef TB, tuberculosis, which would flourish in the bacteria-friendly environment created by the substance. Bovine TB damages the internal organs and the bones of the spine, leading to severe spinal deformities. It is estimated that up to 500,000 young people had died from bovine TB from the milk in the Victorian period, which is why you should check your sources and not get everything from one source, like your mom telling you this random article that she found on Facebook. Number 6, carbolic acid poisoning. Victorians linked cleanliness to godliness and respectability. The idea that it was next to godliness was very deeply ingrained. The new science of microbes only testified the Victorian preoccupation with tackling germs which they now knew could lurk out of sight. Chemical cleaning products to eradicate dirt and diseases were heavily advertised and highly effective, but their active toxic ingredients like carbolic acid were contained in bottles and packages that were indistinguishable from other household products. Boxes of caustic soda and baking powder could be easily mistaken. In September 1888, it was reported in an article that 13 people had been poisoned by carbolic acid in one incident, and 5 died. And only in 1902 did the Pharmacy Act made it illegal for bottles of dangerous chemicals to be similar in the shape of ordinary liquids. So it took a couple of years, but still, at least now we wouldn't have issues identifying bottles from the other. But as cleaning products go, arsenic and citrusine were commonly used in Victorian cleaning products, which if some don't know, the immediate symptoms of acute arsenic poisoning includes vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Those are followed by numbness, tingling of the extremities, and muscle cramping and death. But the Victorian era was also about fitting into their corsets, and a few illnesses wasn't necessarily seen as a bad thing. But either way, the era in itself wasn't unfamiliar with tragedies, as death lurked at every corner from either poisonings or TB.